my name is Niki Giberson, and I live on a sheep farm in Port Republic. And my favorite time in history is the colonial days. So I want to ask you something. Do you know that you have something with you all the time that would ever keep you from being bored again? It's your imagination. And what I want you to do now is to imagine that you lived in colonial days. Because in colonial days, you had lots and lots of things to do that are different from what you have today. So if you just recently came into this country from England, you have to know that England was making laws. They were saying that you couldn't bring spinning wheels like this into this country. You couldn't bring looms, you couldn't bring sheep, because they wanted the new Americans here to purchase everything from England. So in America, we had decided from the very beginning that we don't want to live by the laws of the tyrant king. We want to be independent from England. So the only way to do that is to start making our own clothing and do some other things as well. But I'm going to show you now, if you lived back then and you were maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, you would have to help your family to survive. So these are the things you would do. If you were lucky enough to have a sheep farm, like I do, once a year you'd give the sheep a haircut, and then after you take the wool off, you'd have to tease the wool. Now I don't mean, nah, you're ugly. Not that kind of tease. By tease the wool, you just pull it gently apart like this, and all the grain and any pieces of dirt, any pieces of hay, they would fall out. Then these are called carders, and the older children would card the wool. This is what you'd have to do to get it all ready before you could even spin it into yarn. So these are carders. Just gets all the fibers going in the same direction. And after it's all done, you roll it up, and that's called a rolag. And that's what you use to spin from. Now it's all ready to spin. Now back then, a lot of times you spun the wool dirty and then you washed it. This has been washed already, which is okay. And your foot decides how fast you're going to spin, and your fingers decide how thick the yarn is going to be. Now there were women who might be an older sister or an aunt who would spend her whole life spinning wool for her family, because that was a very patriotic thing to do. If you spun wool for your family, your whole family would have clothes to wear. So what you would do, you had no time to date, you had no time to court, you only had time to spin wool, and that's all you did. And that was called a spinster. Nowadays, a spinster is an unmarried lady. But back then, a spinster was a very patriotic woman who spun wool for the entire family. So once the wool is all spun and put on this is called the bobbin right here, then you would take what is called a niddy-noddy. Now there's a little poem. Anytime you can make a poem with anything, it's going to make it a little bit more fun. So when you unwind the wool off of your bobbin, you say niddy-noddy, 2 heads, 1 body. And as you round it around, you count. 'Twill be 1, 'tain't 1, 'twill be 1 by and by, 'twill be 2, 'tain't 2, 'twill be 2 by and by, 'twill be 3, 'tain't 3, 'twill be 3 by and by, 'twill be 4, 'tain't 4, 'twill be 4 by and by, till it gets up to 40 wraps. And once it's wrapped around 40 times, then you have something called a skein. So this is a skein. Now, do you think I can wear it like this? Is this a good fashion statement? I don't think so. You have to make something out of it. There are 3 ways to make things out of wool. You can knit it, crochet it, or weave it. Now, knitting is with 2 needles, crochet is with 1 hook, but weaving is you need a loom, and you would set it up with the warp, and you'd weave back and forth, under, over, until you had cloth. And then once you had cloth, you could cut it out, sew it, and then you would have clothing to wear. Now, I want to ask you a question. What color do you think white wool comes from? If you said white, you're right. What color sheep does brown wool come from? Brown or black? Then you're right. What color sheep does blue wool come from? Did any of you say blue sheep? I hope not. There is no such thing as a blue sheep. So if you wanted to wear a different color besides white or black or gray, you had to dye the wool. So you're going to think I'm very strange. What I do is I take flowers and I grow them in my garden. Marigolds make beautiful colors. And I cut the marigolds off, the tops of the flowers. I put them in a big pot of boiling water. I have a fire outside, and I'll cook the flowers until the color comes out. Then I'll dip the wool in, leave it in there for a while, and when I take it out, it's different colors. So this was an experiment that my daughters did for a science fair one time. And what it is every stripe is a slightly different color by different chemicals that they added. Like you might have some tin mixed in, or maybe ammonia, or maybe vinegar, or maybe you cook it in an iron pot, but all those things would change it. The only strange thing about it is, as brilliant as marigolds are, these are all kind of earth tones. They're not super exciting colors, but at least they aren't just white or gray or black or brown. So that's exciting. I even tried pokeberries one time. Pokeberries are a beautiful magenta berry. Once again, I got earth tones. Now the most interesting thing about that is all these colors look good together. They'll never clash. Like only chemically made colors clash. But ones that comes from nature always look good together. So that's that. Now picture what royalty wears. They don't wear these earth tone colors. They wear red, they might wear blue, and if you mix red and blue together, you get purple. Sometimes they wear purple. Well, those are dyes that came from across the ocean. They were very expensive, and if you were wearing those colors, people would know that you were very wealthy because you were wearing royal colors. But they were very hard to come by. Now I want you to think a little bit. If you lived back in colonial days, you wouldn't have any electricity. So just think about some of the things that you wouldn't have that you have today. You wouldn't have electric lights, so what would you use? You'd have to make candles. You'd have to make them yourself. Now, if you were lucky enough to have a candle mold, this is what a candle mold looks like. You'd pour the wax in, and you'd have a wick coming down through here. And once the wax hardened, you'd pull it out, and then you would store them in a very safe metal container so no critters would come and eat your candles, and then you'd have light. Another thing you wouldn't have is you wouldn't have a refrigerator. Now, one little girl told me that, I said to her, how do you get ice in the winter or in the summer for an ice cold drink? She said, I know. You'd go to Alaska, you'd dig up some ice, you put it in your wagon, you'd cover it with hay, you bring it back, you bury it underground so when you wanted ice, it would be ready. Do you think you could do that? No. Another little girl said, oh, I know. I wouldn't have a light in my refrigerator. Do you think you'd have a refrigerator? No. So what you had to do is every single day, you had to think about what you wanted to eat because every single day you had to make it fresh. And if you wanted a sandwich for lunch, your mom would have had to think 5 hours before to make a loaf of bread because that's how long it takes to make a loaf of bread. 5 long hours. Now, as children back then, your job would be to help your family survive. Your job nowadays to do 3 things. Do well in school, come up with ways of not being bored, and you can help your family a little bit. But you're not really helping your family to survive. If you lived back then, boys, you'd learn how to hunt, you would all work in the garden, you would help raise the sheep, you'd have to feed and water the sheep every single day. You'd have to help them give a haircut once a year. Once a year you help them give birth so they have lambs, so then you can use lamb's milk or sheep's milk if you want to. You girls, you would learn how to clean, you would learn how to sweep. When you're 4 years old, you start learning how to sew. You had to learn how to sew so you'd have clothing to wear. So your jobs back then would be very, very different. If you were fortunate enough, you could go to school. But for the most part, all the children were needed to help the family survive so you could eat and wear clothes, have a roof over your head. Your cooking you would do over a fire. There was no stoves back then. So you would have to help gather firewood and start your fire and keep it going so that you can cook your stew or cook your venison or cook your rabbit or whatever you were eating. You had to cook it. Now in the wintertime, there wasn't really good insulation in the houses and it was very cold. So you would have to just make sure that that fire was always going. And how many times do you think you would take a bath in the winter? Because there's no running water in the house. So you would have to either go outside and gather some snow and melt it, or go to a pond. If it's frozen, you have to break the ice. If you're lucky enough to have a well, you'd have to go out in the freezing cold and get water from the well. And then if you wanted a bath, you'd have to bring it into the house and you'd have to put it near the fire so it would melt and be warm, and then you would take a bath. Well, I'll tell you how many times people usually took a bath in the winter. 0. The houses weren't well insulated. You don't want the people getting sick and getting drafts, so they usually just didn't bathe very often in the winter at all. And everybody was like that, so everyone sort of smelled the same, so that's just the way it was. But you had to keep yourself safe and healthy and protected. Okay, I hope this gave you a little bit of an opportunity to just think about how different life was, and maybe be a little appreciative of what we have nowadays with microwaves and stoves and heated homes and all the things that we have. We're so fortunate nowadays that life is not always about work, that we can play a little bit too. Someday, once all this is over, you'll be able to come and visit our farm. That would be wonderful. Have a great day. These are all of our sheep having their afternoon snack. This is our newest lamb. She is 1 week old, lovely Rita. And she's about a week old, and Molly's going to hold her and tell you all about some interesting sheep facts.
A baby sheep is called a lamb. A female grown sheep is called a ewe, spelled E-W-E. Yes, I know it's weird. And a male sheep is called a ram. And a multitude or group of sheep is called a flock. Well, if you look at the sheep's mouth, I'm not really going to do that because, I don't want to, But if you look in the sheep's mouth, they only have bottom teeth. So, and if you look at their feet, they do not have claws. So their only defense is running. They're pretty fast. And you only have to be faster than the slowest sheep to survive.